The International Monetary Fund has urged the federal government to rework its 2025 54.99 trillion naira budget to reflect a less favorable oil price environment, warning that the country remains vulnerable to external shock despite recent microeconomic gains. Welcome to Business Point. It's a program that extracts the Nigerian economy and the government policies. I am your host, Kikelomo Okeri. In its latest Article 5 consultation with Nigeria, the International Monetary Fund praised bold reform undertaken by Nigerian authorities in the past 2 years, including the removal of the fuel subsidy, cessation of Central Bank of Nigeria financing of fiscal deficit, and the liberation of the foreign exchange market. However, the fund emphasized that more effort is needed to consolidate recent gains and ensure that translate into broader benefits for populations, particularly amid growing downside risk. The fund explained that the 2025 budget needs to be recalibrated to lower oil price, noting in a report also emphasizing that the importance of maintaining a neutral fiscal stand that prioritizes growth-enhancing investment. The fund warns that a drop in the global oil price or a higher external financing cost could jeopardize Nigerian fragile recovery, strain fiscal buffer, and trigger exchange rate pressure. The fund further warns that implementing the 54.99 trillion naira budget without adjusting for more conservative assumption could widen the fiscal deficit from 4.1% to around 4.7%, further adding to the Nigerian debt burden. Oil remains a cornerstone of Nigerian economy, accounting for the bulk of export and fiscal revenue, while recent improvements in hydrocarbon output have helped lift the GDP growth to 3.4% in 2024. The IMF cautioned that this pace remains inadequate on the per capita basis, noting that growth has been steady but too low to per capita terms, and inflation remains high, especially poverty and food insecurity have risen despite the microeconomic progress. Looking ahead to 2025, the IMF projects similar GDP growth at 3.4%, buoyed by improved oil production, the commissioning of a new domestic refinery, and a resilient service sector. In alignment with the Nigerians' current interest rate stance, the IMF recommended the Central Bank of Nigeria maintain a tight monetary policy until inflation deceleration becomes firmly established. It reveals that inflation has fallen significantly from an average of 31% in 2024 to 2.97% year-on-year in May 2025, but remain one of the highest globally. The fund stressed the importance of keeping real policy rates positive to support price stability and exchange rate credibility. Another the reform that the increased price discovery and liquidity in the FX market, but flagged the urgent need to implement a more structured intervention framework. The IMF stated that a robust foreign exchange intervention framework focused on containing excess volatility is essential, adding that Naira should remain a shock absorber in response to external disturbance. This is because the FX market's debt remains limited and the country's rising export to short-term portfolio inflows poses fresh risk. You can recall that in 2024, Nigeria saw a rebound in capital inflow and successfully re-entered the Eurobond market, reflecting improved investors' confidence. Reserves also improved due to a current account surplus and stabilization of the Naira. However, elevated external rollover needs means the FX market must be agile and intervention must be data-driven and transparent. According to the International Monetary Fund, on the fiscal side, the IMF welcomed the government's recent tax policy reform, describing them as an important step towards enhancing revenue mobilization and creating fiscal space for development spending. The fund also advised while urging completion of reform necessary to exit the FATF grey list. Despite recent economic stabilization, Nigeria continues to face deep structural issues, with IMF pointing out that the GDP growth, while positive, has not translated into broad-based improvement in living standard. The fund further emphasized the need to improve agricultural productivity and address security challenges, especially emphasized as critical to reducing fragility and food security. The Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, has urged the international community to recalibrate the global financial system to better serve the need of developing economies. Delivering Nigerian international statement at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Sevilla, Spain, Edun highlighted the ongoing imbalance in global finance that continues to marginalize low and mid-income countries. He says, in today's evolving global landscape, self-reliance is essential. There is need to prioritize digital infrastructure, transparency, and institutional reform to deliver more for Nigeria with every naira spent. The conference convened nearly 60 heads of state, over 150 countries, and approximately 15,000 delegates to discuss ways to re-energize financing for sustainable development. Edun emphasized that meaningful reform must go beyond national efforts, calling for stronger international collaboration in tackling tax inequities and illicit financial flow, both of which disproportionately affects economies. Also addressing the gathering was UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who painted a stark picture of the obstacle to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Guterres warns that 2/3 of the Sustainable Development Goal agreed upon in 2015 are now significantly off track, requiring a monumental $4 trillion in investment to realign progress. Despite the significance of the event, Guterres noted the absence of the United States, which withdrew from the process earlier in the month. Nevertheless, world leaders adopted what has been termed the Sevilla commitment, renewing the global promise to elevate low-income countries through an equitable financial system. In closing remarks, Guterres laid out their action pillars to steer and World Bank towards sustainable development. He urged wealthier nations to honor and aid commitment by doubling development assistance and called for innovative financing tools to unlock private capital. He also advocates for tripling the capacity of multilateral development bank to fast-track investment, with developing nations spending an estimated $1.4 trillion annually on debt servicing alone. Guterres also called for urgent restructuring of what he described as the unsustainable, unfair, and unaffordable debt system. A proposed borrower forum aims to introduce a more transparent and balanced debt resolution mechanism. He therefore advocates for a more inclusive financial architecture where every country, regardless of the income level, has equal say. Guterres reiterated the need for a fair global tax system, emphasizing that it should be shaped by all, not just few. The federal government of Nigeria has begun the deployment of skilled professionals to St. Lucia and other Eastern Caribbean countries following the signing of a new technical manpower assistance agreement aimed at strengthening diplomatic ties and deepening South-South cooperation. The agreement was signed in Castries, the capital of St. Lucia. Representing Nigeria was the Director General of the Nigerian Technical Aid Corps, Honorable Yusuf Buba Yakub, while General Modest Steven, the acting permanent secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs, International Trade, Civil Aviation and Diaspora Affairs, signed on behalf of St. Lucia. Yakub says it is an outstanding achievement just days after Mr. President's directive to deploy technical aid to St. Lucia and the wider OECS under the agreement. Nigeria will send volunteers, including teachers, medical professionals and agriculturists, who will serve as OECS countries for 2 years. Nigeria will cater for allowance and logistics to provide accommodation and other local support. According to Yakubu, Nigeria has already begun deploying of over 300 Nigerian professionals across Africa, the Caribbean and the Pacific since the beginning of Tinubu's administration in May 2023. Nigeria's deployment of the professionals of St. Lucia's is part of a broader South-South cooperation strategy unveiled by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu during his diplomatic visit to the Caribbean along the manpower agreement signed in Castries, St. Lucia's. The President also launched a scholarship program for students from the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States to study in Nigeria universities, which will commence from next year academic year. The initiative also includes cultural educational exchange, giving Caribbean students the opportunity to reconnect with their African roots. A Nigerian OECS joint committee has been established to handle implementation, including student selection and placement. President Tinubu also proposed visa waiver for holder of diplomatic and official passport from all. $8 billion as a non-interest based loan to 101 communities in Yobe State under its agroclimate resilience in semi-arid landscape project. The state coordinator of the AgriSal, Sheikh Mohammed, announced the disbursement during the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding of Acceptance with 101 scale-up communities in Damaturu. The agreement to enable communities to access a non-interest community revolving fund loan. According to Mohammed, each of the 101 community will receive 25,000 US dollars, that is about 38.3 million naira, amounting to a total of 2,525 US dollars, that is about $3.8 billion. He added that the current phase of the intervention will benefit 482 farmers and community groups comprising 7,340 direct beneficiaries and 4,857 mills and 2,483 mills. The coordinator says the initiative is aimed at enhancing agricultural resilience and improving livelihood, adding that the initiative marked a significant phase in empowering climate vulnerable farming communities across the 17 local government area of Yobe State. It says the loan, which follows the successful pilot disbursement to 10 communities, was designed to stimulate economic activities, enhance finance income, and promote responsible financial management. The AgriSal State Coordinator says that the facility is in line with the global best practice and the World Bank supported AgriSal objectives of reversing environmental degradation and promoting climate-smart agriculture in northern Nigeria. It says the World Bank gave a no objection for scaling up after a 65% recovery rate was recorded from the pilot phase. The AgriSal State Coordinator also lauded the commitment of the Governor Mai Mala Buni of Yobe State, who has consistently driven the successful implementation of AgriSal in the state. In his remark, Sidi Karasua, the State Commissioner for Environment, who is also the chairman of the steering committee, described the initiative as a bold step. He recalled the symbolic presentation of CRF check that were launched by Buni in January, marking the beginning of the second phase after the initial intervention in 2 micro watershed. It says the fund is more than financial support. It is a tool for transformation that enables the farmers to expand operations, adopt modern techniques, and increase commitment to build a resilient as a wrap today. The Nigerian Oil Share Index wrap up the first trading day of July 2025 on a bearish note, dipping by 237.3 points to close as 119,741.23 points. This marks a 0.2% decline from the previous day close at 119,978.